Welcome back to the Mountain Takes. I'm Isaac. Today we're examining a pattern that repeats on mountains every single year. Experienced climbers making decisions that seem reasonable in the moment, but prove fatal at altitude. Different climbers, different mountains, one identical arithmetic. Stay with me, because this is where it matters most. It was May 29, 2026, at approximately 7:30 a.m. at Camp 4 on Mount Everest's south side. The altitude was 26,000 feet. The temperature was -42 degrees Celsius. The oxygen level in the air was approximately one-third what it is at sea level. A Sherpa guide named Dawa Sherpa, age 31, was preparing for a final push to the summit with a Polish client. The client was wealthy, experienced in mountaineering, and had paid approximately $95 for his Everest expedition. Dawa had been hired as his personal guide through a commercial expedition operator based in Kathmandu. The arrangement was standard. The client would attempt the summit. The guide would support him. They would descend together, but nothing about what happened over the next 7 days would be standard. Dawa Sherpa had been working as a high-altitude climbing guide for 12 years. He had summited Everest 7 times. He had guided clients on K2O, on Denali, on multiple 8,000ers across the Himalayas and Karakoram. He was experienced, capable, and trusted by the expedition companies that employed him. He was also poor, earning approximately $3, 0 to 70. 5,000 per climbing season for work that regularly exposed him to altitude sickness, exhaustion, and death. His wife was in Kathmandu. His children depended on his income from climbing. He took the work because the alternative was poverty. The Polish client, whose name was not widely publicized in initial reports, was attempting Everest as part of his personal mountaineering goal. He had successfully climbed other high peaks. He had the fitness and the technical skill to attempt Everest. He also had the economic resources to hire a private guide, to purchase supplemental oxygen, to arrange evacuation insurance. Dawa and the Polish client began their summit push on May 29th, moving upward from Camp 4 into the death zone, the altitude above 26,000 feet where the human body is essentially dying, where every moment at that elevation represents cells being destroyed, where the only question is how quickly you can descend to lower altitude before the damage becomes irreversible. The climb proceeded. Dawa was moving well. The Polish client was moving well. They were making good time. The weather was holding. The visibility was decent. Everything seemed to be progressing according to plan. They climbed through the afternoon, through the evening, through the night of May 29th, 30. By dawn on May 30th, they were above 27,000 feet, approaching the final push toward the 29,032-foot summit. But at extreme altitude, the human body's responses become unpredictable. The Polish client, despite his fitness and experience, began to experience symptoms of altitude sickness. His breathing became labored. His coordination was declining. His judgment was becoming compromised. Dawa recognized the signs. He had seen them hundreds of times, the body's rebellion against the impossible environment. He suggested turning back. The client refused. He said he could continue. He said the summit was close. He said he wanted to push higher. They continued. By midday on May 30th, they were at approximately 27,500 feet. The Polish client's condition was worsening noticeably. His movements were becoming erratic. His speech was slurring slightly. Dawa was watching him carefully, understanding that his job had shifted from guide to caretaker, from facilitator of summiting to preventer of death. At some point during the afternoon of May 30th, the Polish client made a decision that would alter both their fates. He decided to descend. He told Dawa they were turning around. They were going back down the mountain. The descent from extreme altitude is actually more dangerous than the ascent. The body is more exhausted. The judgment is more compromised. The technical difficulty of moving downward on steep terrain at altitude exceeds the difficulty of moving upward. Dawa and the Polish client began their descent. They moved carefully through the afternoon, and into the evening of May 30th, they were descending through the death zone, moving toward lower altitude where their bodies might have a chance to recover. What happened next is where the Story becomes unclear because Dawa's account and the Polish client's account differ significantly. According to Dawa's later statement to rescue teams and expedition investigators, the Polish client became increasingly disoriented during the descent. His judgment was compromised by altitude sickness. He was making poor decisions about rope placement, about route selection, about when to rest, and when to continue moving. At a certain point, the Polish client, moving faster than Dawa, moving with less caution, moved ahead of Dawa on the descent. He was perhaps 50 meters ahead, moving down the fixed ropes, descending toward Camp 4 and lower altitude. According to Dawa, the Polish client reached a section of the descent and then simply kept going. He passed Camp 4. He continued descending without waiting for Dawa. He descended alone, moving quickly, putting distance between himself and his guide. Dawa, moving more slowly, more carefully, following proper procedure, was left behind. By the time Dawa reached Camp 4, it was evening on May 30th. The Polish client was gone. He had continued descending toward lower camps. He had not waited. He had not left supplies. He had not coordinated a meeting point. He had simply descended and left Dawa at 26,000 feet with minimal gear, no supplemental oxygen, and no immediate plan for rescue. What followed was 7 days of survival at extreme altitude under conditions that medical science suggests should have been fatal within 48 hours. Dawa had some clothing. He had a sleeping bag. He had the remnants of supplies left at Camp 4 by other expeditions. And critically, he had a small amount of food that had been abandoned, some chocolate bars and other items left behind by climbers who had summited and descended days earlier. He had water, which he created by melting ice using a small stove and fuel that was available at the camp. The first night at Camp 4 alone was the beginning of a nightmare that would last a week. Dawa was at 26,000 feet without supplemental oxygen. His body was in active breakdown. His brain was being starved of oxygen. His lungs were likely beginning to accumulate fluid from the altitude-induced pulmonary edema that affects climbers at that height. His core temperature was dropping despite his sleeping bag and clothing. He was conscious of the fact that he was dying slowly, but dying nonetheless. But Dawa did something that kept him alive. He did not panic. He rationed the food he had. He melted ice for water. He stayed in the tent. He conserved his energy. He understood, from years of experience on mountains, that survival at extreme altitude is about minimizing energy expenditure, maintaining hydration, and waiting for rescue. He knew that climbers at lower camps would eventually realize he was missing. He knew that rescue teams would organize. He knew that his only job was to stay alive long enough for help to arrive. On May 31st, Dawa remained at Camp 4. He was alone. His radio had limited battery and limited range. He could not reliably communicate with camps below. His situation was unknown to most of the expedition. The Polish client had descended to lower camps. He reported that he had summited. He did not initially mention that he had abandoned his guide at altitude. By the time other climbers and expedition leaders realized that Dawa was missing, hours had already passed. June 1st, 2-3 passed. Dawa remained at Camp 4. His condition was deteriorating. His oxygen saturation was certainly dropping to critical levels below 50%, approaching the threshold where the brain cannot maintain consciousness. His body temperature was fluctuating. He was eating small amounts of chocolate and ice. He was melting snow for water. He was doing everything possible to maintain the absolute minimum functions required to stay alive. On June 4th, rescue teams from the expedition, coordinating with Sherpa from other camps, reached Camp 4. They found Dawa alive. He was weak, disoriented, suffering from severe altitude sickness and hypothermia, but alive. He had survived 7 days at 26,000 feet without supplemental oxygen, a feat that contradicts much of what medical science understands about human survival at extreme altitude. The rescue was complicated. Dawa could not walk unassisted. His body had been so thoroughly compromised by a week at the death zone that his legs would not support him. He had to be carried, lowered, supported as he descended toward lower camps. By June 5th, he had reached Camp 2 at lower altitude where his body could begin to recover. By June 6th, he was at base camp receiving medical care. The aftermath revealed several critical details. The Polish client had indeed abandoned Dawa deliberately, or at minimum, had made the decision to descend rapidly without ensuring his guide's safety or well-being. The expedition company investigated. They found that the Polish client had violated basic mountaineering ethics, the responsibility of a climber to ensure the safety of guides and teammates. But legally, there was limited recourse. The Polish client had paid his fee. He had reached his goal of attempting to summit Everest. Dawa had survived against extraordinary odds. It was May 12, 2013, on Mount Annapurna in Nepal. The mountain sits at 8,091 meters and has the highest fatality to summit ratio of any 8,000er, approximately 1 in 3 climbers who summit do not return alive. The season had started slowly. Spring conditions had been unstable. Snow had been heavy. The weather forecasts had been unreliable. But by May 12, a weather window had opened. The forecast showed clear skies for approximately 48 hours. Multiple expeditions, who had been waiting for weeks for conditions to improve, made the decision to push for the summit simultaneously. At base camp, there were climbers from various nationalities, various expedition companies, various skill levels. Some were professional mountaineers, some were experienced amateurs, some were wealthy clients who had paid expedition operators significant fees for the privilege of attempting Annapurna. The planning began immediately. Teams would leave for the higher camps that day. They would climb through the night. They would summit on May 13th. They would descend on May 13th or 14th. The plan was aggressive, but the window seemed real. The climbers began moving up the mountain. The route to Annapurna's summit follows the north face, a route that is technically challenging and constantly threatened by avalanches, seracs, and unpredictable weather. The climbers fixed ropes. They established their route. They moved methodically upward through the afternoon and into the evening of May 12th. By nightfall, multiple teams were climbing. Simultaneously on the same route, approximately 20 climbers from different expeditions were above Camp 2 on the night of May 12th, 1-3, all pushing toward a summit attempt. The teams were spread across different sections of the route, but all heading in the same direction, all racing against the weather window, all dependent on the same forecast that promised clear skies and good conditions. The weather forecast was wrong. During the night of May 12th, 1-3, conditions changed. A weather system that had not been fully predicted by the forecasters moved in from the south. Snow began falling. The wind increased. By dawn on May 13th, visibility had dropped significantly. The promised clear skies never materialized. Instead, climbers woke to storm conditions, heavy snow, strong wind, reduced visibility, the exact opposite of what they had been promised. Multiple teams made the decision to push ahead anyway. They had invested weeks at altitude. They had invested significant money. They had invested emotional energy in the attempt. Turning around now, after climbing through the night, seemed unacceptable to many climbers, so they continued upward, moving through worsening conditions, pushing toward a summit they could not yet see. By 10 a.m. on May 13th, climbers were spreading across the upper sections of the north face. Some had reached approximately 7,800 meters. Some were still lower. All were in storm condition. The snow was falling heavily. The wind was pushing 40 kilometers per hour. The visibility was poor, and the conditions were getting progressively worse, not better. At approximately 11:30 a.m., on a section of the route between 7,600 and 7,900 meters, an avalanche began. The heavy new snow that had fallen during the night had accumulated on the steep north face. The wind had loaded it unevenly, creating unstable slabs. The exact trigger, whether it was a climber's passage, whether it was natural failure of the snow structure, whether it was a combination of factors, was never definitively determined, but the result was clear. A large slab of snow began to slide. The avalanche swept through the route where climbers were positioned. It carried climbers downslope. It buried others in place. It destroyed the fixed ropes that climbers were depending on for safety. The slide continued for approximately 200 meters before the snow decelerated and stopped, leaving climbers scattered across the debris field, some injured, some buried, some killed instantly. The time the avalanche stopped, 4 climbers were dead. Their names were Fiona Kabusenge, a Ugandan mountaineer, Shin Kazuhiro, a Japanese climber, and 2 others whose identities took longer to confirm. Multiple other climbers were injured. The route was completely compromised. The fixed ropes that climbers needed to descend safely were destroyed or buried. The survivors faced an impossible situation. They were above 7,600 meters. The weather was worsening, not improving. The route was damaged, and there were injured climbers who needed assistance. Some teams began an immediate descent, moving quickly down the mountain, helping injured climbers as best they could. Other climbers, recognizing that descent was becoming increasingly dangerous, sheltered in place, waiting for conditions to improve. One of the survivors, a climber named Tamara Lunger, an Italian mountaineer, was injured in the avalanche, but remained mobile. She helped other injured climbers. She coordinated with other teams on the mountain. She became part of the informal rescue effort that emerged from the chaos of the accident. Her actions and the actions of other experienced mountaineers on the route likely prevented additional deaths by helping injured climbers descend, or by providing shelter and support at high altitude. By May 14th, the weather had improved enough for a rescue helicopter to operate. The helicopter was able to reach the area and evacuate some of the most seriously injured climbers. By May 15th, most of the surviving climbers had descended to lower camps. The avalanche that had seemed like a catastrophic isolated event had killed 4 climbers, injured multiple others, and brought the season's climbing to a halt. The investigation that followed determined that the avalanche had been triggered by the combination of heavy new snow and wind loading. The forecast that had promised clear skies had been significantly inaccurate. The decision by multiple teams to push for the summit, despite worsening conditions, had placed climbers in the path of an avalanche that was nearly impossible to predict or prevent. What made the May 2013 Annapurna avalanche significant was not just the death toll, though 4 deaths in a single event is substantial. What made it significant was that it demonstrated how rapidly mountains can change their minds, how a weather forecast that seems reliable at base camp can become completely wrong at altitude, how the decision to push forward, made by experienced climbers with valid reasons, can result in catastrophe. The 4 climbers who died, Fiona Kobusenji, Shin Kazuhiro, and 2 others, were skilled mountaineers. They were not reckless. They were not inexperienced. They were climbers who understood mountains and who made a reasonable decision based on available information. And the mountain changed the conditions anyway. If you've ever wondered what happens when mountains change their minds mid-climb, if you've ever questioned whether experience and skill can protect you when nature decides differently, subscribe, because there are more stories of mountains that teach lessons at the cost of lives. It was September 17th, 2025, at approximately 2:30 p.m. on the summit ridge of Cima Grande di Lavaredo in the Dolomites of northern Italy. The mountain sits at 2,999 meters, just below 3,000 meters, technically not a major alpine peak by global standards, but one of the most technically demanding rock climbs in the Alps. Cima Grande is known for its steep walls, its exposed ridges, its unforgiving rock. Franco Gaspari was 64 years old, and he was descending from the summit when he fell. The fall was approximately 30 meters down exposed rock face. He struck the mountainside multiple times during the descent. By the time his body came to rest on a ledge below, he was already dead. His injuries were catastrophic: multiple fractures, internal bleeding, trauma incompatible with survival. Franco Gaspari was born in 1961 in northern Italy. His entire adult life had been dedicated to mountains. By the time he turned 30, he had already opened multiple climbing routes in the Dolomites, routes that other climbers had deemed impossible. He had established first ascents that required technical skill, vision, and an almost supernatural understanding of rock and ice. His routes became classics. Climbers from around the world traveled to the Dolomites, specifically to climb the routes Franco had pioneered in the 1980s and 1990s. But Franco was more than a route opener. He was a mountain guide and rescue specialist. For over 40 years, he had worked with the Bergrettung, the Alpine Rescue Service. He had responded to calls on the worst days. He had descended into situations where people were dying, where the mountain had people trapped, where the only hope was a skilled guide willing to risk his own life. Franco had done this hundreds of times, thousands of times across 40 years. He had pulled climbers out of crevasses. He had rescued injured mountaineers from exposed exposed positions. He had administered emergency aid on cliff faces where one wrong move meant falling. The climbing community in Italy knew Franco's name. He was respected not just for his technical ability, but for his character. He was the guide other guides called when someone was in serious trouble. He was the expert who understood the Dolomites better than anyone alive. He had mentored younger climbers. He had trained rescue personnel. He had given his entire professional life to the mountains and to keeping people alive on those mountains. On September 17, 2025, Franco was on Cima Grande. The exact reason for his presence that day is not entirely clear in the documentation, whether he was guiding a client, whether he was doing a solo climb, whether he was conducting a rescue training exercise. What is documented is that he was descending the summit ridge when something went wrong. A climber on the mountain later reported hearing a sound like rockfall, followed by silence. When rescuers reached the location, they found Franco's body on a lower ledge. He had fallen approximately 30 meters, and the injuries from striking rock during the descent were severe enough that medical intervention would have been impossible even if he had been rescued immediately. The irony that defines Franco Gaspari's death is profound. A man who had spent 40 years descending into dangerous situations to save other people died in a fall on a mountain he knew intimately on terrain he had climbed dozens of times. On a descent that should have been routine for someone of his skill level, he had survived thousands of potentially fatal situations. He had faced down the mountains repeatedly and walked away. And on September 17, 2025, in the middle of the afternoon, on a well-known route in the Dolomites, the mountains finally took him. The investigation that followed determined that Franco had fallen while descending exposed rock terrain. There was no evidence of equipment failure. There was no evidence of environmental hazard like rockfall from above or unstable rock. The assessment was simple. At 64 years old, after a lifetime of physical exertion at altitude and on technical terrain, Franco had lost his footing. One slip, one moment of lost balance, one foot catching on rock, and gravity had done the rest. What made Franco's death notable in the Italian climbing community was not just that an experienced guide had died, but that he had died in a way that seemed to violate the rules of mountaineering expertise. The assumption in the climbing world is that knowledge and experience protect you, that if you know a mountain, understand its hazards, have climbed it many times, you are safer. Franco's death challenged that assumption. It suggested that experience, while it dramatically reduces risk, does not eliminate it, that on mountains there is no absolute safety, regardless of how much you know. The Alpine Rescue Service issued a statement honoring Franco's decades of service. They noted the hundreds of people he had saved, the countless rescues he had executed, the lives his expertise had preserved. They noted that he had died as he had lived on the mountains he loved, doing the work he believed in. A colleague was quoted saying, "Franco was the best of us. He taught us that rescue isn't about heroics. It's about skill, preparation, and respect for the mountain." The mountain took him on a day when it decided his time was finished. There was nothing he could have done differently. I'm Isaac from The Mountain Takes. Franco Gaspari was 64 years old. He had saved more people than most of us will ever meet. He had opened routes that climbers still climb today. He had given everything to the mountains, and the mountains took him anyway, the same way they take everyone eventually. If you've ever wondered what it costs to spend a lifetime in service to something dangerous, subscribe, because there are more stories of people who gave everything and still lost. I'll see you on the next descent. It was July 8, 2023. K2 shoulder, 24,500 feet, temperature minus 42 degrees Fahrenheit, whiteout conditions, and wind-cutting visibility to meters. Marcus Webb was 34 years old, a CrossFit champion from Denver, Colorado. 6 competition titles, AVO2 max of 78. He had YouTube followers, supplement endorsements, and a belief that his engineered body would conquer altitude. He wasn't expecting the mountain to have different rules. This was his first expedition above 20,000 feet. He'd trained intensely high-altitude chambers, 6 a.m. CrossFit sessions, $40,000 in gear. He told his Instagram followers. K2 doesn't stand a chance. Pemba, his Sherpa guide, had guided 15 K2 climbers. He recognized the pattern immediately. At Camp 1, Marcus's oxygen saturation was 75%, acceptable but concerning. Pemba said, "How are you feeling?" Marcus said, "Fine, just adjusting." Pemba knew better. He documented. By Camp 2, Marcus's appetite had vanished. He was drinking constantly, eating half his meals. Pemba checked his saturation, 68%. Your body is struggling, Pemba said. Marcus dismissed it. I've trained for this. My cardiovascular system is elite. At Camp 3, saturation dropped to 62%. Pemba was direct. We rest tomorrow. No summit push. Marcus laughed. My VO2 max is 78. I'm stronger than everyone here. He wasn't. That night, Marcus developed a persistent cough and woke gasping for air at 2 a.m. His hands were trembling. Pemba made a note. Signs of HAPE, client refusing descent. The summit push began at 4:47 a.m. Marcus was struggling immediately, breathing labored and irregular. Every 50 meters, Pemba checked on him. How are you, Marcus? Each time, Marcus pushed faster, as if speed would prove something. By 6:30 a.m., his saturation had dropped to 57%. They rested. Marcus couldn't hold his water bottle steady. At 8:15 a.m., saturation was 54%, severe hypoxia. Confusion was setting in. Marcus was weaving on the rope, slurring words. Pemba grabbed him. We need to descend. Your body is failing. Marcus pulled away. I'm fine, just need water. We're close. At 11:47 a.m., Marcus clipped past Pemba and accelerated upward, ignoring his guide's shouts. Pemba called, Marcus, stop, come back. But Marcus was beyond listening. His hypoxic mind had one goal, summit. At 1:15 p.m., at 25,000 feet, another climber saw him moving like a drunk person, eyes unfocused, words slurred. I have to summit, I promised. At 2:34 p.m., Marcus collapsed 300 feet below Camp 4 on the Black Pyramid. He simply fell backward into the snow. Klaus, another climber, reached him first. Marcus was gasping, his eyes open but unseeing. Pemba arrived and heard Marcus's final words, fragmented and desperate. I can't. Why can't I just push through this? My body, it's supposed to be strong. Pemba performed CPR for 8 minutes in minus 42-degree cold. Marcus's body was too far gone, his lungs filled with fluid. His organs failed from hypoxia. He died at 2:47 p.m., the autopsy revealed. High-altitude cerebral edema, high-altitude pulmonary edema, multi-organ failure. Marcus had removed his oxygen mask multiple times, believing his lungs were strong enough. They're not. No lungs are at 25,000 feet without oxygen. Pemba's statement. I told him to descend at Camp 3. I told him at the shoulder. He refused. The mountain doesn't care how strong you are. Marcus's widow, Catherine, told reporters. Marcus thought fitness could beat the mountain. The mountain doesn't care how many push-ups you can do. It was October 12, 2022. Annapurna 1 between Camp 3 and Summit Ridge, 25,600 feet. Temperature minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Clear morning deteriorating into clouds by afternoon. David Krueger was 41 years old, a professional bodybuilder from San Jose, California. Mr. Olympia competitor. 285 pounds of engineered muscle. Supplement company owner. His flaw was simple. He believed his engineered body made him immune to the mountain's rules. His guide, Karma, had summited Annapurna twice. Karma told him during planning, the mountain doesn't care about muscles. Altitude affects everyone equally. David smiled. I'm not everyone. At base camp, at 13,500 feet, David was already struggling. Headache, nausea, shortness of breath, oxygen saturation, 82%. Karma recommended slower acclimatization. Spend an extra week, Karma said. David refused. I don't need extra time. I came here to summit. At Camp 1, his massive body became a liability. Every pound of muscle requires oxygen. Climbers lighter than David were moving well. David was exhausted, breathing hard, unable to eat. Karma checked. You okay? David said, just tired. Better tomorrow. He wasn't. At Camp 2, saturation dropped to 78%. Karma expressed concern. David dismissed it. It's adjusting. Give it time. Karma recommended oxygen. David refused immediately. I didn't come here to use artificial help. I want to summit under my own power. By Camp 3, David showed clear HAP symptoms: persistent wet cough, rapid shallow breathing, unable to sleep lying down. He woke gasping for air. Karma heard him coughing through the tent wall and knew the situation was deteriorating. Summit morning, Karma made a formal recommendation. We should not go up today. Your body shows serious altitude sickness. We should descend, recover, try again in 3 days. David's voice was frustrated. 3 days? My sponsor is waiting. My coaching clients are waiting. I trained for 14 months to turn turn back at Camp 3, Karma said quietly. I have guided 43 climbers on Annapurna. 12 died. The ones who ignored their guide's warnings are mostly in that 12. They began at 5:30 a.m. David was struggling before they left camp. His massive legs, which could squat 700 pounds, were struggling to move forward in thin air. Karma checked frequently. How are you feeling, David? Okay, be honest. I'm struggling, but I can continue. At 8:15 a.m., saturation was 71%. His cough intensified, wheezing with each exhale fluid in the lungs. Karma offered oxygen. Use this, David, please. David refused. No, I can do this. I'm stronger than this. At 10 a.m., at 24,800 feet, saturation was 68%. His movements were clumsy. He was stumbling, confused about the route, though only one exists. Are we going the right way? Karma said, yes, stay with me. But David's brain, starved of oxygen, couldn't process spatial information. His cough was constant. His face flushed, despite minus 35 degrees. Sweat soaked his shirt. 2 hours from summit, Karma made final recommendation. David, we must descend now. You are very sick. Your body is failing. We risk death. David's words were slurred, eyes unfocused. I'm fine, he said. Clearly not. At 12:47 p.m., David asked Karma the same question for the 4th time. How much longer to summit? Repetitive questioning meant cerebral hypoxia. His brain couldn't form new memories. Karma's concern turned to fear. You are not thinking clearly. We descend now. David refused. I'm going to summit. At 1:15 p.m., David separated from Karma and moved upward alone. Karma called for him to return. He didn't. At 2:10 p.m., climber Sophie, descending, saw David moving erratically. He was confused, very confused, zombie-like. I offered oxygen. He refused. He said, no, I'm strong. But he was clearly very weak. At 2:45 p.m., Karma radioed base camp. Climber in severe distress. Altitude, sickness critical. Rescue needed immediately. But helicopter rescue at 25,400 feet is impossible. Climbers cannot descend fast from that altitude. The rescue team knew if David didn't descend on his own power, he would die on the mountain. At 3:20 p.m., Karma reached David. David had stopped moving, sitting down in snow, back against his pack, eyes open but staring at nothing. Karma checked saturation, 48%. Critical failure imminent. Karma radioed. Climber not responding to voice. Oxygen. Saturation 48%. Preparing emergency descent. They began descent at 3:45 p.m. David semi-conscious, walking but not understanding, repeating, I'm strong. At 4:15 p.m., David collapsed completely. His legs gave out. Karma laid him down, pulse weak and irregular, breathing shallow, skin cold and clammy, pupils dilated. They carried David to emergency shelter at 25,150 feet. Weather deteriorated. Wind increased. Helicopter rescue became impossible. Overnight descent in whiteout was too dangerous. They were stuck. At 7:30 p.m., David's condition deteriorated further. Breathing became irregular. Saturation dropped to 44%. Respiratory failure imminent. Karma and Sophie tried to give oxygen. David's lungs so filled with fluid the oxygen couldn't process. At 8:15 p.m., David's breathing stopped. His heart continued 1 minute. Then it too stopped. David Krueger died at 8:16 p.m. on October 12, 2022, at 25,150 feet. His final words, Mom, I tried so hard. The autopsy revealed pulmonary edema, lungs filled completely with fluid, drowning him from inside. Combined with cerebral edema and complete hypoxia, organs failed simultaneously. Cause: multi-system organ failure. Critical finding: David had been offered oxygen 6 times. He refused 6 times. His final refusal came at 7:10 p.m., just over an hour before death. Karma's statement: I have guided 18 years on this mountain. Strength means nothing. Humility means everything. David had physical strength. He had no respect for the mountain. The mountain demands respect, not muscles. David's training partner, Mark. David was the most dedicated athlete I knew, but gym dedication is different from mountain survival. He couldn't separate them. The mountain separated them permanently. His mother, Linda. My son believed his body could do anything, but perfection doesn't matter at 25,000 feet. Listening matters. Humility matters. Accepting help matters. David was too proud. The mountain doesn't forgive pride. Every year, elite athletes arrive at these mountains with similar beliefs. Every year, some don't leave. The mountain takes no prisoners, regardless of strength or competition titles. If you faced your own mountain, let me know. Subscribe for more stories of mountains that can't be outtrained. I'm Isaac, and I'll see you on the next ascent.
It was April 25th, 2018. on Mount Everest Northeast Ridge at 28,000 feet, where the air is thin enough that every decision moves slowly and every consequence arrives fast. Cassidy Whitmore was 26, from Boulder, Colorado, though she'd lived in Los Angeles building a TikTok presence, 234,000 followers. Her brand was Limits or Lies. The sponsor was a boutique adventure apparel company. They wanted her to climb the mountain, film it, and post real-time via satellite and fiber. What nobody told her, because it was implicit, is that real-time posting from 21,000 feet requires dividing your attention between staying alive and staying relevant. For Cassidy, those things had stopped being compatible somewhere. Around Camp 2, Dawa Sherpa was 31, 13 years of guiding, 5 8,000-meter summits. His 6-year-old son was born with a cleft palate. The surgery was scheduled for August in Kathmandu, a private clinic. Good reputation, high cost. Pasang's wife had asked him directly, "How many more expeditions until we can afford it?" He'd done the math. This expedition was number 4. One more good season and his son could get fixed. From base camp onward, Cassidy was filming. The landscape, the tents, the Sherpa porters. Every moment was potential content. The problem is that climbing Everest requires minute-by-minute presence. The mountain doesn't pause for brule. During the rotation to Camp 1, Pasang watched her stop to frame a shot of the Khumbu icefall. Standing on the rope, one hand on the line, the other on her phone, trying to get the angle right. A climber positioned above described seeing her standing on a suspect section of bridge, immobile, filming, for maybe 4 minutes. Pasang moved her bodily off the unstable ground. She laughed and said, "Did you see that shot?" At Camp 2, she set up a filming station. 45 minutes of meditation sequence with the mountain in background. While she was filming, her oxygen levels dropped. Her face paled. Pasang moved her to medical. It took 2 hours for her vitals to stabilize. He approached the leader. "She's not acclimatizing well. The filming is making it worse. She's distracted." The leader understood. The footage was exceptional. The satellite company was happy. The sponsor was happy. The only person with a problem was the person trying to keep her alive. The leader said he'd talk to her. Cassidy's response was gracious and public. "I totally understand. Safety first." Then she went back to her tent, edited her footage, and uploaded it via SatFi. 2 hours later, the video had 47,000 likes. The algorithm had spoken. The mountain was secondary. Pasang stopped raising concerns. He'd learned the politics. By April 23rd, the weather was favorable. Summit window opening. The camp made the call. She left Camp 4 at 11 p.m. on April 24th with Pasang and 2 other climbers. They moved reasonably fast. By dawn, they were on the upper northeast ridge. By noon, they were approaching the summit. Cassidy reached the summit at 12:34 p.m. The first thing she did was film a 360-degree video, turning in a complete circle with her phone extended. Pasang watched from behind her. He was tired. He was aware that turnaround was closing, that her standing on the summit ridge spinning in a circle was taking exactly the time they couldn't spare. He called out, "We need to move. Descent now," she said. One more angle. She stepped backward to get a different perspective. Behind her, not visible, the cornice overhung the ridge by maybe 8 feet. The cornice is snow shaped by wind into a cantilever and overhang with nothing beneath it except a 2,000-foot vertical drop onto the Tibet side. She took one more step backward. The cornice fractured silently. Pasang saw her expression change, a moment of confusion, like her brain had sent an "I'm falling" signal, but her body hadn't registered it. She disappeared, not dramatically, just gone. Pasang moved immediately to the edge. She was visible for maybe 30 feet of the drop, tumbling against snow. Then the surface curved away and he couldn't see her anymore. He keyed the radio. "Cassidy has fallen, cornice collapse, she's gone." The search that followed was ceremonial. Her body wasn't recoverable from the Tibet side without permissions neither country wanted to grant. She stayed on the mountain. What did get recovered was her phone. The final video was still queued in the app, ready to post, waiting for a SatFi connection. 2 hours later, when a climber reached base camp with the phone, the video was manually uploaded. It got 127,000 likes in the first 12 hours. Pasang didn't climb again for 2 years. He couldn't. The guilt had. Wait, his son's surgery was postponed. His wife had to find work. When he did finally return to guiding, he was different, stricter, more conservative. Climbers complained. He wouldn't let us summit, overly cautious. What he actually was someone who'd watched the algorithm kill someone and decided that no video was worth the weight of that memory.